Good evening from the Authors Guild. My name is Johnny Kenichi, and I'm here with a stellar group of writers to talk about publishing after the MFA. Now, as we all know, a Master of Fine Arts is primarily focused on the craft and academia, and it's not uncommon to complete the degree and still have some lingering questions about your next steps getting published. Now, first, I'll say, if you're not familiar with the Authors Guild, I implore you to subscribe to our free newsletter. We do a lot of free public programming like this about the business side of writing. And you're also welcome to go ahead and join the Guild, or at least keep us in mind for when you get a publishing contract or agent contract, because our lawyers will review those for you. We have 13,000 members, and too many of them joined the Guild on their second or third book because they had been burned by a bad deal before. Anyway, you can check out authorsguild.org for more info about what we do. Thanks to our audience for being here, and thank you for the questions you submitted in advance. You have the Q&A box here to chat or chime in with further questions, and we'll leave some time at the end for Q&A. And now, let me welcome our wonderful panelists. Alex DiFrancesco is the author of All City, Psychopomps, Transmutation, and the forthcoming Breaking the Curse. They were the first transgender awards finalists in over 80 years of the Ohioana Book Awards, as well as a 2022 recipient of the Ohio Arts Council's Individual Excellence Award. They're currently an LGBTQIA+ nonfiction and children's book editor at Jessica Kingsley Publishers. Darrel Alejandro Holnes is an Afro-Panamanian American writer. In addition to being a wonderful playwright, he's also a poet, the author of Migrant Psalms and Step Motherland. He's a recipient of the Andres Montoya Poetry Prize from Letras Latinas, the Drinking Gourd Poetry Prize, and a National Endowment for the Arts Literature Fellowship in Creative Writing for Poetry. Ashley Farmer is the author of the essay collection Dear Damage, winner of the 2022 International Rubery Book Award in Nonfiction and the 2020 Sarabande Series in Kentucky Literature, as well as 3 other books. Her work's been published in places like Gay Magazine, TriQuarterly, The Progressive, Santa Monica Review, and elsewhere. And our moderator, Leigh Stein, is an author, a cultural critic, and a career coach for writers. She is the author of 5 books, including the critically acclaimed satirical novel Self-Care, and the poetry collection, What to Miss When. Leigh, Alex, Darrel, Ashley, thank you for being here. I'll turn it over to you, Leigh.
Thank you, Johnny. Thanks for having me. I am a proud Authors Guild member. I have made use of their legal services. Highly recommend becoming a member of the Guild. So, who am I? Why am I here tonight to talk about publishing? I don't have an MFA, but I do work with writers, and I often find myself translating the book publishing industry to writers who have come out of MFA programs, often with a book-length thesis that they're hoping to get published. And I work with those writers. So I'm always thinking and talking about MFA programs. I'm thinking and talking about the creative writing industry and the book publishing industry. So my plan for this evening is to talk to these terrific writers about what their expectations were going into their MFA program around publishing, how their MFA programs prepared them for careers as writers, how they balance the work that pays the bills with their writing. This was a very popular question among audience members that submitted questions early. And we're going to talk tonight about building a brand and a platform on the internet or through in-person community so that your writing career has longevity and you can continue to publish books. So my first question tonight for the panelists is, what were your publishing ambitions going into your MFA program? Did you envision your MFA program as a time to just focus on learning the craft of writing? Or were you going in thinking about publishing a book? Why don't we start with Alex, if you don't mind starting us off?
Sure, absolutely. So I went back to get my MFA specifically because I wanted to teach creative writing at a university level, which is a terrible reason to get an MFA. It's a terrible, terrible reason. Those jobs barely exist, and they come with about like 10 years of underpaid adjuncting beforehand. So if that is anybody's goal with an MFA, I just would warn you against it right now. But as far as publishing goes, I was in a writer's group for about 3 years before I went into my MFA, and I had what I knew was a publishable manuscript, which I sold my first semester that I was in my MFA. And then during the course of my MFA, I wrote 2 more manuscripts. I really maximized the kind of time to write a manuscript of short fiction and a novel. The novel was my thesis project, but that is currently still not published. And the short story collection I published before I left my MFA program. So I kind of just hit the ground running and just, tried to do it all basically. And the one thing I went for, which was to teach, is the one thing I ended up not doing. So
That's such a great answer. I'm so glad you started us off, because I think some people might go down the MFA track because they think, oh, this is a program, this is a structured path to follow. And I think what we're going to find tonight is that the path is actually very windy, and that everyone kind of finds their own way through the maze. Darrel, would you like to chime in next about your MFA experience and your expectations around publishing when you entered?
Yeah, absolutely. I really came into my MFA program with the goal of writing a project book, is what people used to call it. One of my thesis advisors, Avan Jordan, had just won the Whiting Award for Magnolia, which is a collection about the first African-American student to win the spelling bee, even though that victory was stolen from them in a kind of final round where they were asked to spell the word nemesis and actually got it wrong, and lost the title consequently, which was all unprecedented and kind of against the rules. But anyway, it's this genius collection, and I'm plugging it right now because just everyone should read it and check it out. And it's one of the books that really inspired me to want to get my MFA. And it was the kind of book that I thought I would end up writing while I was there. And so the book is interesting because it looks at a woman's history since that defeat in her early childhood, and it tells the story of her life in backwards order. So we start out near when she's about to die, and then the last poems in the book are about what happened at the spelling bee. And so it's this fascinating way of looking at her life in this really unique way, where we kind of see what the origins are the further we move into the book. And so for those who don't know what a project book is, or what I mean by that, that's just an example of how we see this happen in poetry often. And when I went into my MFA program, I thought of a couple different projects, and none of them really stuck. And I ended up writing a lot of poems that were about things that I missed the most, that were essentially about nostalgia. And I ended up writing about family, and ended up writing about people who I loved that were no longer in my life. And I ended up writing about, the country that I'm from, which is Panama, and all the different places in the US I had left behind. And I left my MFA program with the seeds of what would become my full-length collection, which is called Stepmotherland. And so I think what worked for me in my MFA program is that even though I had a particular book project in mind, I was still open to what the experience brought for me. So it wasn't ultimately kind of like what I had envisioned, but it still was a really productive time in my life that, I hope inspires a new generation of writers who are out there kind of looking for direction. So that was my journey.
I really appreciate that you began with like this kind of, I talked about a winding path, but you're kind of telling the story of like the lamp that kind of lit your path. Like you started with a collection and a poet that really lit you up, and you were like, how do I do that? And
Yeah,
that led you.
definitely.
Ashley, please tell us about your MFA experience and whether or not it contributed to publishing your first book.
Yes, so when I went into my program, I didn't have a project in mind, really. I frankly felt so just happy to be there that I didn't really have the kind of, I think, professional focus or maybe understanding of the publishing world that some of my colleagues did. There were people, peers in my group who were amazing, and they came in kind of knowing like, I want to write a novel. I already have drafts of things, and I was not in that place at all. And so I really wanted to just discover better what kind of writer I am. And it was really useful for me in that way. I think about a year in, I saw the finding a project, as Darrel is talking about, could be fruitful. It could be a good way of working, and sort of seeing like a glimmer of maybe a collection or something like that. And I also think it was useful for me to work that way, whether or not it would be published one day. I think just in terms of kind of giving me something to focus on or work toward, it was really useful. So I worked on interconnected kind of, I was there for poetry, and worked on kind of interconnected pieces that became my first book, published a few years after that. But for me, when I went in, it felt very like pie in the sky, like one day I might have a book. And then through the process of really figuring out what interested me, I knew I had some things that at least went together, and how I could shape it in the couple of years after. You know, when I left, I was excited to do that and kind of plan to work on it more. And that's what I did. And that's what it became. And since then, my interests have gone other places now too, but it was useful to use that time to just sort of discover without necessarily the pressure of feeling like publishing was ultimately what I, was aiming to do with those pieces.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people describe their experience of the program that way, and that it's a way to actually exist without the pressure of publishing. It's like it can be a kind of carved away sacred space to just develop as a writer. Let me turn to my next question. I think I'm going to throw this to Darrel first. My next question is about whether and how your MFA program prepared you for a career as a writer. I like Darrel, I began as a poet too. And when I was coming up as a poet, it was almost like a joke to call yourself a professional poet. It's like a punchline, because like, how could you get paid for poetry? Though I do think we're in a golden era of poetry right now. Poetry is really popular, but I'd be curious to talk to each of you. What kind of training or guidance or mentorship did you have in your MFA program preparing you for a life as not a hobbyist writer, but a professional writer?
I think that there's what my MFA did, and then there was what I did with my MFA. And so what my MFA program did, we were part of a new generation of writers in, the genres of fiction and poetry in the program, who were required to teach, partly because they wanted to ensure that the time that was spent in the program gave folks a new career opportunity when we graduated. A lot of people in my MFA program at the time had other careers that they decided to either put on hold or to pivot away from by getting an MFA. And teaching sometimes actually ended up making less money than they when their corporate jobs, whatever that might have been, before they got their MFA. So it wasn't necessarily about making money, but it was definitely about how do you sustain yourself as a writer. And it's typically by surrounding yourself by other writers and in a literary community of some sort. And for many people, that is the university. And so we were really supported to become college professors of creative writing by being required to gain those experiences. And then the program provided us with I call it a teaching circle, where, it's kind of a support group, because none of us, I think, specifically had a background in education. And so this was a way of kind of bolstering what we were learning on the job with a more structured kind of curriculum, so that we had a better idea of how the classroom functioned. And then there was what I did with my time in the program. And so I had a background in producing arts events and culture events, working in marketing and publicity, and doing some fundraising for small nonprofits. And oftentimes those things were intersecting. So we would actually fundraise for a public event that then I would end up producing, and oftentimes also had to do the marketing for one of those situations. And so while I was a graduate student at the University of Michigan, I also took a class on contract writing, fundraising, and grant writing. And I also took as many anthropology classes as possible because I wanted to specifically grow in as a researcher in anthropology. And those are all skills that I continue to grow and then ended up leveraging when I moved to New York City and needed employment. So I continued my work with nonprofits. In one of my 9 lives, I also taught and I'm currently teaching. And I also produced many artistic events and, reading series and book tours and, performances. And now I also do that in theater as well. So, I think one of the great things about the University of Michigan, and there are many other MFA programs that are like this too, you don't only have to take classes that are within your specialty, and having that kind of support really made it up to me to prepare myself for the next step. And I didn't really know how much I wanted to teach, so I made sure that I could grow my skills in other areas as well.
Yeah, you're absolutely a multi-hyphenate, and I'm really glad you brought up all the different hats that you have worn or continue to wear, and also that you brought up the word marketing. I almost wonder if like marketing is the undersung skill of professional writers. Like I wonder if learning to be a marketer is even more critical than learning how to teach, because it sounds like you and Alex each had your own experiences of teaching, and maybe Ashley did too. But let me turn it to Alex. What was your experience like? And if I should have asked this already, Darrel just mentioned Michigan. If you do want to mention where you got your MFA, you're welcome to. But I'm curious, Alex, what was your professional training or mentorship, or how was being a writer as a career taught, if at all, in your program?
It wasn't. We were not given a huge amount of sort of push to continue what we were doing after. It was sort of just like the program is over and that's that sort of thing when you graduated. Yeah, I honestly don't feel that like my MFA prepared me for being a writer as much as like preparing myself for being a writer before I went to my MFA was something that I carried with me afterwards. Like I said, I was in like a writers group that met once a week for like 3 years before my MFA. So I knew that would be a vital part of continuing writing for me, to like be in writers groups. I lived in New York before I went to Cleveland for my MFA. So like going to events was always really important to me. Building community that way was always really important to me. So I feel like if anything, my MFA almost sort of like spoiled me, because I spent 3 years like doing nothing but reading and writing. And then after I was like, oh, now I kind of have to go back to like what it was before, where, I have a day job and I'm fitting this in where I can. So that was like a bit of like a hurdle for me to get over after I finished my MFA. Getting back to the place that I had been comfortable with, where I was just like fitting my writing in around the edges of like what I was doing to support myself and sustain my life. It felt kind of awful, honestly, after like spending years just focused on the thing that I loved most. But I wouldn't say there was much preparation within the MFA itself. We did have classes where we were encouraged to do internships outside of like our program. And that kind of like the purpose of that was to like get you sort of in the community and like, either reading at a literary magazine or mentoring someone or being mentored. So that was pretty useful. But again, those were things that I had already embedded into my life before my master's program. So it was really kind of just more of a thing of shifting gears and getting used to going back to life the way it was before my full focus was writing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's like the program is what you make of it and what you bring to it. Ashley, how about you?
Yes, so I went to Syracuse University for my MFA. That's where I spent 3 years, and I did do teaching there too. Really loved it. Also thought I would pursue it professionally. also learned what Alex shared at the beginning, which was that's not a super sustainable path necessarily to pursue. And so, you know, I think a few things that that prepared me to like move my writing forward after this kind of time of exploration in this really great community that was fostered there, you know, by the professors in our program. We had some really kind of frank conversations about earning a living alongside your writing. And I feel like I saw examples of or learned about how, you know, you might be able to balance a 9-to-5 life with your writing and still pursue that, still like move things forward, and that how you earn a living doesn't necessarily even have to speak to your writing life, though I think you can find connections. I think writers do that organically. And so I think that was really helpful. Something in hindsight, I didn't really know it at the time, but, you know, I worked on a literary journal when I was there, like a lot of folks do. I took a few classes outside my discipline, including art in the community, working with like elementary school students, and, you know, and some of those things that I frankly kind of took on a whim because it sounded fun, like those little kind of like these little sort of side projects or these things that kind of accompanied my MFA program ended up serving me professionally later on. It really was helpful to, when, you know, applying for jobs like fresh out of an MFA. Those open doors. So I feel really grateful. I didn't know that at the time, that those would be helpful in the way that they were. But it was also really nice to have professors speak to you about, you know, how you can be a writer. It doesn't have to look just one way in terms of your publishing pace or the you know, kind of track you take, whether it's smaller presses or an agent and a big press. I mean, all of those things I think were we got some encouragement around, or some ideas about how you might do that. But yeah, anyhow, thanks.
I love that you brought up the term side project. I love side projects. I think side projects, though not lucrative initially, can be a great way to grow your audience and build your platform as a writer. I started a side project called BinderCon, which was a conference for women and gender variant writers. Alex was on our team. They were one of the ones that helped with BinderCon, and now they're here on the Zoom. So I'm a huge fan of side projects to grow an audience and a platform. My next question is going to be a spicy one, perhaps controversial. I'm going to read a short quote from one of my favorite craft essays. It's by Annie Dillard, and then I'm going to ask a question about it. And I think Johnny has the link, so Johnny can put the link to the essay in the chat if anyone wants to read it later. But Annie Dillard writes, "It makes more sense to write one big book than to write many stories or essays. Into a long, ambitious project, you can fit or pour all you possess and learn. A project that takes 5 years will accumulate those years' inventions and richnesses. Much of those years' reading will feed the work. Further, writing sentences is difficult, whatever their subject. It is no less difficult to write sentences in a recipe than sentences in Moby Dick, so you might as well write Moby Dick." I've taught this essay in classrooms. It's very controversial. We can argue about it, but here's my question. From what I understand, having not gone to an MFA program, but knowing people who've gone to an MFA program, the MFA program is set up through the workshop model. And so you're frequently workshopping shorter pieces. So it makes sense that many students who come out with an MFA have collections of shorter pieces. They have collections of essays, collections of short stories, and collections of poetry instead of a novel or a memoir. And then they're extremely disappointed when it's difficult to find an agent who can sell that essay collection, poetry collection, or short story collection. So I wonder if my panelists want to argue with Annie Dillard, who's not here, so we can say what we truly think, or whether you think there's something in this, what's the word I'll use, tension between the kind of books that are being shaped in MFA programs and the kind of books that are selling to publishers for the amount of money that would make you feel better if it landed in your bank account. Ashley, can I put you on the spot first?
Sure. Yes, I'm happy to kind of think on that and chat about it. Although I have to say, I'm, probably not as qualified as some people. I've really only, I haven't had an agent. I haven't gone down that road, and everything I've published of 4 books, they've all been collections, and so I think that is often writing that interests me, that I find exciting, and I think I'm drawn to making that kind of work. That said, do you think it takes more time? Maybe it takes a different kind of process to sort of assemble, those pieces. And certainly in terms of publishing, I think it can be trickier.
Ashley, can I also ask
Yeah.
you, I bet people are curious, how did you sell those 4 collections without an agent? Did you go directly to a university or a smaller press yourself?
It was a little different with each one. My first book was out on Tiny Hardcore Press when it was Roxy and Gay's press, and they were these little kind of micro books, and I had published a few pieces with folks involved in that press, and then kind of put it out there, so I've done a lot of that kind of submitting during open periods, submitting to contests, that kind of thing. And I'm interested now in what another chapter might look like if the agent route is in my future. But I think for me too, I view my writing career so far as kind of like the long game. So it's taken me some time, and I'm okay with thinking about like across many years, and what might evolve or happen. That might not be satisfying for every writer, though. I can see how some people might really want to put their all like into a book that's going to be pitched and bought and have things happen with it that way. So yeah.
Thank you for weighing in on that. Alex, can I throw it to you? And Alex, you also bring the experience of someone who works on the publishing side as an editor.
Yes. Also, my MFA program did have a focus on writing novels. We didn't just workshop short stories. We could also do a 2-semester sequence where we workshop novels in segments. So that was how I actually ended up with a novel and a collection of short stories at the end of my program. And I don't know, I want to push back against the quote. I feel that when you're writing a collection, it's almost like writing a concept album. Like, you really have to kind of meditate on one thing and like draw things from all over the place to it. And the pieces should ideally stand alone, but like they should be better when they're together, right? So in that way, like it in my head, like whenever I write a collection, I'm like writing an album. Without music, because that's not one of my talents. Yeah, I think that like to really write the kind of like collection that I personally enjoy, there is the same sustained sort of focus that you have to have for a novel. There's just a little more space between the pieces. And they can be obviously like wildly different, but they should have some kind of core that's like making them all kind of hang together. I don't know if that is something other people agree with or not, but that would be my favorite kind of collection to kind of create. And I have a book out, and then I have a essay collection and a short story collection. And the more I write, the more I find myself drawn to collections. Like my short story collection that came out in 2021, I read a theory book about like the Gothic genre. And there was this one section about vampires being like outsiders to like the dominant paradigm in like the Gothic. And that stuck with me through 3 years of writing short stories, and all of the short stories in that collection had some sort of element of Gothic and outsiderness to them. Yeah, so I don't think that there's really the divide that quote kind of presumes there is, if you're doing a collection in the way that I do them, at least.
And Alex, can I just ask if you had an agent sell your short story collection, or if you went directly to an indie press?
So I published my first novel with an indie press that I had interned with when I was 26 and just out of undergrad. And then after that came out, I queried my agent with my thesis novel. And I also had my short story collection at the time. So I was negotiating the sale of the short story collection when my agent got back to me. And then my agent was able to step in and negotiate it for me instead, because she ended up picking me up as a client before I sold the book. So the first novel I sold myself at an indie press. The second collection, my agent sold at the same indie press, but for a better deal than I probably would have gotten on my own.
That's great. Darrel, I would imagine you are pro collection as a poet, but talk to me about your reaction to this quote. You already started us off from a great place talking about a kind of project book, which I think, like Alex said, is a way to shape a collection.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that as soon as I got into my program, we were told immediately, writing a great work of literature, whether it's a collection or a novel, no matter the genre, it's not about the amount of time that you spend on it, but really it's about when it's ready. Meaning, like, you might spend 2 years on it and your friend also spent 2 years on it and their collection is ready and yours is not. So it doesn't really matter how much time, like the amount of time that you spend on it doesn't determine its readiness for the marketplace. And so I think this idea that by the end of an MFA, you should have a publishable manuscript, I think that was an idea that was pushed out of our heads the moment that we got into the program. And I think that anyone who might be considering an MFA should consider that too. And I'm pro collection, but I'm also like pro the novel, you know, and I'm pro people setting themselves up to finish the project, no matter regardless whether they're in the program currently at the time that they finish it or they're outside of the program. I want people to feel like they find those resources that are available to them. And I think that there are many that the Authors Guild offers. And as Alex mentioned, there are like independent writer groups in many different cities. There are many in New York. Gotham is one that's quite popular. And a lot of writers just independently have developed their own, like Brooklyn Poets by Jason Koo is another. So I'm unfortunately, I feel like I'm losing sight of the question, but
no, you're good. You're good. I like, you know, she talked about taking 5 years and you said it takes as long as it takes, which I think is a great answer. So let's spend the next 10 to 15 minutes talking about money and marketing, and then we're going to open it up to audience Q&As. So, or Q's that we will A. I want to talk to everyone about how you balance the work that you do to earn a living with your creative writing now that you're in the stage of your life where you are post MFA. And I also want to hear from you, how do you make decisions and set boundaries around unpaid work? Like Ashley brought up the term side project. That might be editing a lit mag, it might be hosting a reading series, it might be like me making TikTok videos. How do you balance that stuff in order to be a writer in public with the private writing that you do on your own? Darrel, do you want to take this one first?
Sure. You know, I think it's a really good idea for folks to have something that they're contributing to the literary community if you are expecting to receive something back. And I think that that can be hard because oftentimes when we're balancing work that might not have anything to do with our literary lives with the actual writing itself, to also find time to go to other people's readings, to go to other people's book launches, to give other people feedback on their writing can feel incredibly daunting. Not to mention those of us who have kids or who have family members that we're taking care of. Just juggling it all can just feel like a lot. But I will say that, you know, the community, in my experience, has supported people that they know will show up for them in some capacity. And so, and as writers, we are our best marketers, and our best publicists. Whether you have a book that's out on a major press or an independent press or a, you know, small press, a university press, whatever it is, like, you are your greatest advocate, and you need a team of people that will support your work, no matter if that publicist is returning your call, or if the publisher is giving you everything that they promised they would, or if that reviewer who read your book and said that they were going to review it actually published the review, because, you know, you're holding your breath waiting for it to come out and it didn't come out, and you thought you were going to sell 1,000 copies based off of that review. Like, there are so many things that people expect to happen, and so many promises that are made to writers that do not always come true. And it's really your writerly community that will help you carry out, to help you fill all those gaps, that will help you meet all those expectations when the rest of the world is falling short. And you'll have nobody on your team if you're not on somebody else's team.
I love that. I just want to punctuate something Darrel said, which is that no one will care about your book launch as much as you care about your book launch. So you have to make yourself number one. Otherwise, you're just going to be disappointed by how everyone let you down. That's a terrible way to feel. Ashley, how do you balance day job life with writer life? And do you still do side projects now?
Yes, so I love what Darrel said about community. I can't say anything better than that, but I really feel that it is tricky to kind of participate in that unpaid work that you have to slip into, like, the 6 o'clock hour before you get up and do other things. But there are a lot of rewards in that too. And I feel like, writing is a pretty solitary endeavor, and it becomes more so when you're out of your MFA program, at least in my case, it did. And so I feel like through, I've worked on literary journals. I worked on the journal Juked for maybe 15 years. I just only recently now kind of stepped away, but connecting with writers in that way through just, working on that journal, kind of a labor of love, I feel like has made me more thoughtful about submitting my own work to other places. I've gotten to know other writers in this way that feels really nourishing and good. And I think I have an appreciation too, because of that, for how many labors of love there are out there, that anyone who's working on a journal or reading series, doing any of that stuff, they're doing it because they're wanting to create community. So I really value that for the reasons Darrel said, and just having those connections too with other people. And then I think, I work in learning and engagement in an art museum, and I have this career that's been really, it's really fun, and I love what I do, and it's very kind of separate from literary work and my own writing. But I feel like the kind of just discipline of a little bit by a little bit has helped me see that I can have a career. I can make a living and do things that maybe inform my thinking about my writing or show up in my work in cool ways. But just, an hour or two working where you can, and finding fulfillment in that, as opposed to those long days that you have maybe during your MFA program, where you can, really kind of take your time. Those increments add up, and I'm such a believer in that. And then I mentioned it before, but I do try to find ways that my everyday life that isn't connected to writing can at least touch the writing part of me, so it doesn't feel like these are all these separate boxes. Trying to find some fulfillment in that, making those relationships.
Yeah, I love the way you talk about how the incremental progress can add up. You don't need 8 hours a day. That's the fantasy. No one wants to write 8 hours a day. I don't want to write 8 hours a day. Alex, I'd love to hear from you. And also, I wonder, since you work in publishing, is it ever like taxing? Does it use the same part of your brain, the writer brain and your kind of publishing editor brain?
It does. And because of that, before I worked in publishing, I was a pastry cook and a baker. And I got very used to waking up extremely early in the morning, which has served me really, really well for writing, because now I wake up at like 5:30 before I go into work for the day. And like, I need that brain to work on my own work. I just need I need that like just awake, still like fresh, ready to go brain to get into the project I'm working on. And then I do that for maybe half an hour or an hour. And then I'm ready to like decompress a bit and then go into my editing work, which I have to say I did so much more work in the community before I was working in publishing full time. I worked for Sundress Publications, which is out of Tennessee. It's a really lovely press. They do a lot of poetry for the poets listening. And I was an assistant editor there. And that's like all of the positions within that press are volunteer. It is a completely volunteer run press. And it is such an amazing community. And I miss it so much. I just don't have time for another part-time editing gig now that I'm editing full time. So like, that is to say, like, I used to be much more involved in like community projects before it was my job to be in publishing. That said, if somebody is celebrating a book or having a launch or doing a reading, I am there. I will bring you cookies. Like, I am always there to celebrate the wins of the community. I think that's really important. As both Ashley and Darrel were saying, like, you have to show up for people, and not even just because like you want them to show up for you, but just because it's the right thing to do, you know? I feel like I've met so many wonderful people that way too, that like it enriches my life more than it's just showing up for another person. Yeah, so I wake up really early. I don't have kids, and I walk my dog and I do my writing. And then I clock in for the day at the publishing job. But yeah.
Great. Let's talk a little bit about brand and platform, and then we will open it up to audience questions. So I can tell everyone that I'm 38 years old and I've been publishing on the internet since I was 19. I owe my entire publishing career to the internet because I was at the right place at the right time, just when online lit mags were just starting up, and that's where I was publishing work. So I know a lot of writers, based on the audience questions I saw in advance, are nervous, uncomfortable, wary of being online. Do they have to be online? I understand the hesitation, but I also feel like the year is 2023. I think the fantasy is that the publisher is going to do everything for your book. The publisher is going to launch your career. The publisher is going to get attention for your work. The publisher is going to build you an audience. But you're not Stephen King in like 1976. Like, the internet exists now, and so we're in this new reality and we have to adjust to it. So maybe the question that I'll throw out to everyone is, what is one strategic thing that you have done to either grow or cultivate an audience? It could be online, it could be offline if you want to talk about an in-person event series. But what's one strategic choice you've done on purpose to create or grow an audience for your writing? And whoever has an answer, you could speak up.
I'll jump in first. So one of the things that worked incredibly well for me was when my first book came out, my novel, I did like a little tour around it. I used my advance money to do a couple events. And these events were not, packed houses, but in every place that I went to, I got to talk to maybe like 5-10 people really closely about my work and what I was doing, and, about their lives and their writing. And that book was so much more successful than when I launched one mid-pandemic and put the same amount of money into publicity that I had spent like doing these small events around the Northeast. So I would say that anything that puts you face to face with people and in conversation with people about your work, and also lets them talk about their work and what they're doing and why they're interested in it. Those are real connections. Like sometimes the internet can be scary, right? Like you can say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing and like have a nemesis for life, right? And it's true though, like the internet can be a scary place. And when you're in person with people and when you're face to face with people, those connections just feel so much more real and genuine to me.
I really appreciate you sharing that you invested part of your book advance into the launch of the book. And I just want to emphasize something that I say often is that like publicity only happens once, like press happens once when the book comes out and then there's no more publicity. But marketing, like getting humans, interacting with humans, you can market a book for years after it comes out. So Alex themselves noticed that human to human connection, really valuable. And I'm sure those readers continue to follow your work. Ashley or Darrel?
Well, I would say, similar to Alex, I think it's a really good idea to do events. And I'm going to specifically talk about podcasts. I was on Poetry on Unbound and also had a poem in the Academy of American Poets Poem a Day and a few other really key podcasts that, really surprised me, the return that I got from it, because, it's just 3 minutes of me like reading a poem on a blue mic in my apartment in the closet where it's quiet and soundproof or whatever. But the amount of people who reached out to me via email, Instagram, Facebook, etc., just to show their appreciation for the work or to invite me to read elsewhere, and to submit for journals and submit for other places. It's really been an experience that didn't cost me anything. I didn't even have to buy a subway ticket, right? I didn't have to put gas in my car. I didn't have to even walk outside. And I didn't have to hire a publicist for it. It just is an opportunity that continues to pay off. And so I think I don't know what technology everyone is comfortable with, but most people seem to be most nervous about social media in particular. But I would say, embrace other forms of technology. Maybe social media is not your thing, but maybe a podcast might be. And that could be a great way to get your word out.
I'm really glad you brought up podcasting, and especially for poets, it's such an auditory art form. I just did an interview yesterday with someone who with tips on how to pitch podcasts, and I'll send the link to Johnny so that it goes out in the email to everyone. Ashley.
Yes, I would just say, I think some well-placed some submissions to journals that feel like a fit for you, even if you're working on bigger projects with components that don't necessarily fit online, but submitting to places that reflect like your what you value as a writer, that feel like it's the audience you most would want to connect with. I have deliberately written things thinking, ooh, one day, if I can place something here, it would be helpful in their strategy to that. So I would recommend that. And I also think too, there are, again, social media might not be your thing, but in that spirit of building community or creating community with other writers, I've done things like, review other writers' work or have conversations or, in interviews. And lots of times journals are looking for those things, a good interview that they can publish. And, not only do you kind of create a rapport with other people, but you're now connected to a place that might help kind of boost your writing and give you a platform other times. And you also have something to share, on social media that's not necessarily just like your opinion on Twitter or something like that. You've created something that you can kind of put out into the world. So I think, if you like if you like doing interviews, if you feel comfortable with reviewing, just those different kinds of forms of engaging with other writers can be a good way to support them and support your own work as well.
Absolutely. And so just to reiterate, I think of brand as what you are known for as a writer, and platform as where you are known for your brand as a writer. And so your platform could be public speaking, readings that you do, conversations you moderate at bookstores or libraries, podcasts you appear on, literary publications. It could also be like op-eds, freelance journalism. It's just, where are you known in the public as a writer? Let me throw it to some questions that I got in the Q&A. One of these, I'll ask everyone this, whoever wants to answer. Someone is curious about whether anyone got their agent based on a reference from someone in the MFA program or a connection through your MFA program. Does anyone have a literary agent from their MFA program? That's a no. So interesting. Okay, let me ask. Someone wants to know money. Does anyone want to talk about their advance for their first book? I can start. My first two books were published by Melville House. They're an indie publisher. I got $2,000 for my first novel, $1,000 for my first poetry collection. Couldn't quit my day job, obviously.
Yeah, I got $3,000 for my novel, $5,000 for my short story collection, and then $7,000 for my upcoming essay collection.
That's the power of an agent. Well, most people probably know here tonight, agents work on commission. Agents earn 15%. So it's in their benefit to get a higher advance because they're only getting paid a percentage of what their author is getting paid. I know this is a personal question. We don't have to, not everyone has to answer this.
No, I would say that my advances, I think were similar. I just want to also add, what Alex mentioned. I think it's a really good idea to have someone help you with your negotiation. My agent actually didn't end up helping me with my negotiation, but my agent did help me find a lawyer, an entertainment lawyer, who really pushed the publisher in ways that I really didn't have the expertise to do. And that ended up being really helpful. And it wasn't just one lawyer, but it was actually a team of associates who went back and forth in the negotiation with the publisher. And so maybe you don't have an agent, and that's okay, but if you can find an attorney or someone else to even just help you think through the terms of the contract, that it's a good idea.
I'm so glad you brought up that possible path, Darrel, to have an entertainment lawyer look at it. If you have a lawyer look at a book publishing contract, you just want to make sure that they are a media or an entertainment lawyer that has looked at similar contracts. But also, here's where we plug the Authors Guild again. If you're a member of the Authors Guild, they provide those legal services. And the Authors Guild website also has a model book contract. So you can actually look at that and compare your contract and see, like, wow, that's really not standard at all what they're asking for. Yeah. Ashley, do you want to add anything about the agent front?
Yeah, sure. I mean, again, not having an agent, I've only ever received an advance for my most recent essay collection, and I'm terrible with numbers, so I'm not quite sure, but I know it wasn't more than 2,000. So I think I've probably earned more money from publishing individual pieces like essays and things like that. So less so for books. Though it's always, you never know how that will end up across the life of a book. But as of now, I think more individual pieces.
Yeah, I also want to throw out, while we're talking about money, that like rights sales end up becoming part of the money picture too. So either getting like, the percentages you want out of that, or knowing that your publisher has like a really good rights team, can end up being more of the money picture than just the advance too.
Yeah, and also a part of my money picture was a commission for the cover art, because I had a particular vision for what the cover art was, and heard horror stories from many friends about being assigned cover art that they didn't approve of. And so with that in mind, I made sure that there was a budget as a part of the contract for the commissioning of artwork for the cover. And then I chose the artist.
That's super interesting. I see I see a number of questions that are about how to choose where to be in public. Should you be on Substack? Should you be on social media? Should you blog? Should you live in New York City? Should you do live events if you don't feel comfortable online? And I'll let the panelists answer, but first I would just say, figure out where your audience is, right? Who is the audience for your books and where do they spend their time? Because that's where you want to be. So if your audience is always hanging out at the library in the library book club, you need to be in the library book club. If your audience is on Instagram, you might need to be on Instagram. But what would other people say if for the writers who are overwhelmed by all the advice about where they should be, where to begin?
I would love to answer it from an editorial position. My dream kind of scenario is like, sometimes I'm looking for a topic that we want to publish a book on, and I just start Googling and reading articles. So well-placed articles that you are getting your point across really clearly are an excellent, excellent, excellent thing to do, because editorial, that's like kind of our dream, that we find this beautifully written like op-ed and then we can get that person to write a book. So that's one piece of it.
That's a great answer. And I would even say, I think of I'm obviously pro social media. I use social media as kind of a laboratory to test ideas. Because of a tweet, I got an assignment to write an opinion piece for the New York Times. Because of a TikTok video, I got an interview on NPR. So I'm in public kind of testing my ideas. And then people like Alex are watching me on social media and they're saying, hey, do you want to write for us or can we interview you about this? So I don't think about being perfect online. I think about it like lab.
Yeah, I would also add, good advice that I was given by the publicist of the press of my poetry collection is do well in your market, and then you'll be able to do well elsewhere. And so I worked with my booking agent to specifically try to mine opportunities in communities that I already had relationships with. So New York, Houston, where I did my undergrad, and Michigan, Miami, just specific places where I know I have literary community, and then to try to post as much as possible about events that are happening there, post photos of the event, thank everyone, tag everyone, etc. And that indicates to other people that you, according to my publicist, and it turned out to be right, it indicates to people elsewhere that you are doing well, that there are readers for your work, and that your local community supports you, and then they're more willing to take a risk on flying someone out or paying them a big honorarium to speak somewhere else, and etc. So do well in your market, whether that's in person or online, I guess, but do well in your market, especially if you're weary of the online space. I think call your local bookstore.
Totally.
Like the old-fashioned stuff still works. So
Totally. Darrel, for those who don't know, do you want to just say briefly what you have a booking agent for and how that's different maybe from a literary agent?
Yeah, so a booking agent really helps secure events and a variety of different opportunities. And so a booking agent is most similar to a speaking agent. Mm-hmm. So if you have, let's say you're a public figure of some sort, and so you're going around like offering business advice because you're the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, or you're a retired politician, like a former president or a statesperson. Speaking agent will make sure that you can leverage your personal experience and professional experience, in the form of typically pretty lucrative speaking engagements that are paid for by either corporations or major institutions like universities. And so a booking agent is very similar. They mostly are tied to the books that you're publicizing, but they mostly represent you in general as an author. And they try to find opportunities that are, worthwhile for your business and time.
Thank you. Before we're coming close on time, before we say goodnight to everyone, I bet there are people in the audience who have MFAs, maybe who are finishing MFAs, maybe who are 20 or 30 years away from their MFA. They're hoping to publish a book, I'm sure. Does anyone have a word of kindness, a word of encouragement, a word of cheerleading that we can leave our audience with before we turn it back over to Johnny and say goodnight? Is there anything that someone told you once that stuck with you and helped you kind of keep going when times were tough?
I'll just say one thing. This is not a word of encouragement per se, but I do think that it is advice that has really helped me, which is write about your obsessions. And, you know, no
You
matter,
stole my answer, Darrel. Now I'm mad. That's good.
because no matter what, Jericho Brown actually told me that. And I think that there's always something really satisfying about that process, no matter what the outcome is. So write about your obsessions.
Yeah, obsession as your engine, that it can power you.
I would say really quickly that there is a piece of art in you that only you in this world can make. So you might as well go for it.
That's great.
And I would add to Alex's comment that there's a place for it too. There's people for it, and it's just a matter of finding them, and that can take a little bit of time. But I'm a firm believer in that there's a place for everybody's work.
Yeah, I love that. And I think to add to Ashley, I think it's worth taking the time to find those people, because once you find them, it's really rewarding. So thank you all for coming tonight and joining us. Thank you to my panelists for sharing so generously and candidly with our audience. Thanks, Johnny, for hosting us at the Authors Guild.
Thank you all so much. I'm feeling emotional because I'm 11 years out of my MFA and I haven't published a book, so I've been taking notes. But yeah, I want to say to the audience, I hope you enjoyed this, and a great next thing to do would be to go to the Authors Guild on YouTube and look at our playlist for business boot camps for writers, where we cover traditional publishing, small indie publishing. Finding your agents was a real good one. A lot of nuts and bolts stuff there to walk you through some of those steps as well. So I recommend that. But yeah, thank you, Leigh. Thank you, Darrel. Thank you, Ashley. Alex, you as well. There you are. And everyone have a good night and stay in touch. You can email me at support@authorsguild.org.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.